Hello and welcome to the Sewing Studio. We've had lots of requests on how to put binding on a quilt. So I'm going to show you how we do that today. So I've made a really small quilt and this is going to be a wall hanging. So I'm just going to put some binding on this to show you how to do it. So it's all quilted. So the first thing you need to do is trim your quilt to the size that you want it to be. So I'm going to do that with my ruler and rotary cutter. So when you've got your quilt trimmed, then we're going to measure our quilt. And this one is 18, we'll call it 18 square. So then I need to work out how much binding I'm going to need. And I cut my binding at 2.5 inches, and I'll show you why in a moment. So I've got some fabric here, which I'm going to use as my binding. And this measures 42 inches. So most bolts, the width of a bolt is 42. So I know that I need 1836, so I need 72 inches to go around my quilt. I also need a little bit extra for the tail at the end, so I get it in nice and neat, and I need a little bit extra for my mitered corners. So I'm going to say that I need 80 inches of fabric, so that is 2 cuts from a bolt. So I'm going to do that now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to tidy up that raw edge. And then I'm going to cut 2.5 inch strips. So I'm a 1/2 inch. And I'm just going to trim off those selvages. And I'm going to go to the machine to join those up. Now I'm doing a straight join today because if you're new to putting binding on, it's easier to do a straight join. Some people do a join at 45-degree angles, but I'm going to do just a straight join. So I'm going to the machine now and I'm just going to sew those together with a 1/4 inch seam. So I've got a big long tail now for my binding. So you can see that I've done my 1/4 inch seam there. So I've joined my 2 pieces right sides together, and I'm now going to go to the iron and I'm going to press this seam open. Normally in patchwork and quilting we press them flat, but when we're doing binding I'm going to press that open, and then I'm going to press this whole strip in half. And now I'm going to press this whole strip in half, wrong sides together. So the next thing we're going to do now is we are going to attach this to our quilt. And I'm going to have this as a wall hanging. So I'm thinking about this is going to be my bottom left here, this bit here. So that's where I want my join to be, or where I'm going to start my pinning, and I tend to do that with all quilts. I just put it down there so it's not right top centre where you've got joins. So I'm going to leave a nice long tail, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start pinning. So I'm going to just come up a little bit away from that corner, because in a minute I'm going to show you mitered corners. Let's come up a little bit more. So I've got a nice long tail here, and I'm going to pop some pins in. So you'll see that I've got my fold going into the quilt, and I've got my raw edge with the raw edge of my quilt. So I'm going to pin that. Just bring it towards me a minute, and when I get to the corner, so I just keep pinning, when I get to the corner I'll try and show it to you on the other camera. Right, so you can see that I've got to the corner now, and to do a mitered corner I fold it, so you can see that I'm folding it into the corner. So I fold it into the corner like that, so I've got a nice crease going into the corner of the quilt. And then what I do is I hold onto the crease and I bring that up like that. I'll do it again in a moment. So you can see now, I'm going to pop a pin in there. So let's see if we can get a close-up of this. So you can see that that bit goes in a loop there, and that bit is folded, and then this bit underneath has got the crease. The crease is really important because when we come to sew, we need to sew into that crease, and I'll explain that again in a moment when we go to the machine. So I'm going to carry on pinning, and then I'll show you again that corner. So we've come along. As we get to the corner, we need to fold our fabric. So I'm just finger pressing it. Can you see I've gone like a diagonal here? So you might be able to see that better on that camera. So you can see the diagonal here is a fold. And then, so put your thumb in that fold and lift this up so that your tail comes down square on this side of the quilt. So again, you've got this loop here, you've got the fold of this piece of fabric going towards your raw edge here, and then when you pop a pin in to hold that. And we're going to do the same on this corner again. It's really important that you put a pin in on those corners to hold it. I'm going to put one last pin here as I've come around the corner, because what I want to do is leave these two ends here like this, because that is going to form our join when we've gone all the way round. So I'm now going over to the sewing machine to sew this. So I'm going to start where my first pin is, and I'm just going to lengthen my stitch on the machine. I've taken it from 2.5 to 3. I've got a walking foot on because we're sewing through all this bulk, and that will help keep it flat so it won't all pucker up. So I'm just starting here, and because this is going to be where our join is, I do a little lock-in stitch. So I'm going to sew to the corner. Now, as I'm approaching this corner, I am going to lift back this little flap, and I'm going to sew. So our little fold line, it's difficult to see because it's black fabric, but that is our little fold line here. So I've just put the pin in there to show you. So I'm going to sew up to that fold line. One more stitch. I've stopped with my needle in. I now lift the foot and I turn it. So I'm now sewing off my stitches in that fold line. So here is where the fold is. So I'm going to sew off to the end. Cut the thread, and then I'm going to, and this is the important bit, fold that flap back over where I've sewn. Don't start sewing here because it won't work. So I'm going to fold it back. So if you remember, you've sewn off, cover your work, fold it back. And then I'm going to come down 1/4 of an inch gap from the top. Scant quarter. Put my needle in and sew to the other corner. And then I'll show you that again in a moment. So you can see I'm coming up to the corner again. So I'm taking out the pin. I'm going to fold that flap back. Let me just show you where that fold is. So the fold is here. This was the fold. So if I leave the pin there, it might make it easier for you to see. So I'm just going to sew right up to that fold line. One more stitch. Stop with my needle in, turn it and sew off in that fold crease. And then remember what I said before, fold it over to cover your stitches, fold it back, and then when you start again, just come down 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm just going to do a little lock-in stitch again at that point, because this is where we're going to have our join in a moment. And it just makes life easier if you've got that little bit of a stitch to hold things down. So I'm going back over to the other table and the other camera now, and I'm going to show you how we make this join. So we've got these two tails, and I'm not doing it at a 45-degree angle, because this was ideally for beginners. I'm just going to do a straight join. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So we've got this gap. So what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to go over to the iron and I'm going to press it and put a nice crease line, but I'm just showing you here because this camera is a bit closer. Come along and put a crease line. So you can see that I've got those two pieces butted up together. And the reason we do it with the iron is it just pushes it so we get a nice accurate crease where we want our join to be. So it's going to be, see, you can see I've got it folded there. That's going to be our seam line. And then I'll show you how to join that. But I'm going to go to the iron now and I'm going to just press that. So press it along into the gap and then just fold that back. Don't cut anything off at the moment because it's the longer the tail you've got, the easier it is. And sometimes the bigger the gap you've got, the easier it is. I might have made life a little bit difficult here because I've got quite a small gap. But anyway, let's give it a go. I'm happier with it there. Right, let's try again with this one. So let's butt it up to there. That crease hasn't gone very well, so I'm just going to give it another go a minute. And it's just worth taking your time to get the right crease because you get a better fit then. So if I come back into the centre and show you here, let's get a couple of pins, you can see here that it's creased. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and open it out. And that is my crease line there. So then I'm going to open this one out. And that is my crease line there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to butt those two together and pin them. So I'm opening my binding at this point. So I'm trying not to lift it because the person that's filming this has just told me it'll all go out of focus if I lift it too much. So it looks a bit awkward, but you'll be able to lift yours up. So I'm just going to pop a pin in there where the crease line is, and I'm going to go back over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew down there. So I'm now going to just sew down that crease line that I made with the iron, and I've got the pins in there, so it's a little bit fiddly, but I've got the pins in there as my guide. So I'm just sewing straight down. I've still got the walking foot on. It isn't worth changing your walking foot for this fiddly little bit. And then before you do anything, make sure that it's the right size. So we'll just get those bits out of the way. Make sure that it's not going to be too baggy. And once I've pressed that seam, it's a bit difficult to see because I've got these bits at the moment, but I don't want to cut those off until I make sure it fits. So I'm just making sure that's going to nest in there nicely. So now I am going to cut this. If I do it here, you can see what I mean. So I'm now going to cut 1/4 inch away from my stitch line, and make sure you're cutting your 1/4 inch away from this side and not the side nearest the quilt, because otherwise you've got to start all over again. So it's really important that when you cut your 1/4 inch, you cut this side of the line. And then I'm going to go back to the iron and I'm just going to press those open like this. And then I'm going to press the whole thing, come back to the machine and machine it. So I'm just going to press that seam open that I've just done. And then I'm going to press this and then I'm going back to the machine to stitch that down, and I'll show you how that looks. So I've stitched that in there like that, and now you can see that will fold back. And so the next thing for us to do is to just flip the binding back. I'm just going to get my binding clips. I do like these clips. And then let's turn it the other way. I'll show you. I need to trim up some threads on this, but it's going to be a wall hanging, so it doesn't matter. So I'm just flipping that over there like that, and I'm going to pop these clips in, and then in a minute I'll show you the corner. So when we come to do a mitered corner, so we come along here like this, and then to do the mitered corner we go along like that, and then we fold it over and pop a clip on it. If I show it you on the front, once it's been hand sewn, you'll see how it sits better. But if you look here now, you can see how that mitre goes into the corner. And that's what's going to happen with all of your corners. So you just carry on round, popping your clips on, and then to finish it off, you literally just hand sew this along here. So you just slip stitch, and I always use the thread that is the same colour as my binding, so I would just slip stitch all the way along there. When you get to your corner, you're going to fold that down like that, so you've got that lovely mitre, and just put a little tack stitch in there to hold it, and then you're going to come along there with your hand sewing till it's all done. And that is how you put binding on a quilt, and how you get lovely mitered corners. So I hope you found today's video useful and it will help you bind your quilts. As always, have fun, and I look forward to seeing you next time here in the sewing studio.